Good morning. How's everyone doing? It's great to finally be with you. It's been a couple of weeks. You've been seeing updates from me every single week, and so we're just really excited to be here in person. Well, virtually anyway. If you're visiting for the very first time, I'm the new lead pastor here at Heartland, and so this is actually both of our very first Sundays. And so, even though it's my first Sunday as well, let me welcome you anyway. Can't wait to connect with all of you. If you're visiting, please reach out on the chat line. And again, my family and I, we're just so excited to be here with you, to be a part of your family, and we're really looking forward to getting to know you. And it's going to be a little bit different in this fall, but we are coming up with some new and creative ways to connect with everyone, and we can't wait to see all of you in a socially distanced kind of way. And in the spirit of it being a new season, it's really inspired this new series that we're going to be starting for the month of August called New Beginnings. And today's message is specifically called A New Beginning When You've Lost Everything, because new beginnings can be great when you choose them. I remember about 8 years ago now, or it'll be 8 years in just a few days, our oldest was born. Her birthday is on August 14th. And I remember being there in the delivery room, afterwards. and my wife had asked me to change our oldest, our firstborn's diaper. And so she handed me like one of these. And honestly, I had no idea how to even use it. Like, they don't have instructions on this. And there's not even a front or back. And I don't even actually know which side the front actually is. And by the way, that whole playing stupid only works for like 5 minutes. And ever since then, we've had 3 more kids. And I tell you, having children has been the greatest new beginning adventure my wife and I have ever embarked on. And even though it's hard, we wouldn't trade that adventure for anything in the world. It's harder than we imagined, but it's also more rewarding than we ever dreamed. But sometimes new beginnings choose you. Like, you don't really have a choice. I remember when I graduated from grade 8 and going into high school in grade 9. In grade 8, I was at the top of the proverbial totem pole. And in grade 9, I was a minor niner. And most of you know that high school can be an incredible experience, or it can be a living hell. And in either case, you actually don't get a choice. You have to go, because sometimes new beginnings choose you, and sometimes new beginnings you wouldn't want to choose actually choose you. Most people I know don't go into marriage waiting for the day they get divorced. On the day you said I do, you probably never thought that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 years later they would say I don't. Most people don't go into marriage thinking like that. It's a new beginning that you probably never saw coming. I know people right now, because of COVID-19, are having to start over again. There are several young people I know who have lost their jobs, and I know other young people who have been told it might be a good idea to start looking for a new career. New beginnings can be great when you choose them, but sometimes they choose you. And sometimes there are new beginnings in areas where you wouldn't even want a new beginning. And as I was thinking about that, I realized something. That the new beginning, positive or negative, isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is the motivation to get out of the mud and get moving again. I mean, how many people do we know? How many do you know? How many are you related to? Maybe it is you, who have just given up on something at some point in their lives. And maybe you know someone right now that is in the middle of giving up on something right now. For example, I know people, just young people in my life that I know, who are temporarily giving up on dating, because honestly, how do you date and be physically distanced at the same time? Like, how do you give a physically distanced hug or a physically distanced kiss? Maybe if you're a dad and you have young daughters, you're thankful for COVID-19 just in that regard alone, that they're not dating right now. I know I would be. There are several young people that I know who have contemplated suspending their education for the time being, maybe travel to wherever they can travel to. There are others I know who have thought of giving up on their education altogether because they're not sure there's a job waiting for them at the end of their degree, and they're already so many years in that it just doesn't make sense to start over again. And please don't misunderstand me. When I say the motivation isn't there, that makes it sound like they're not trying hard enough, and that's not the case. It's deeper than motivation. They're just not sure there's hope. But that word hope can be difficult to define and to explain. And so let me explain it by wording it this way in the form of a question. Is it possible to experience renewed energy when you've become weary from the journey? Is it possible to just feel like it's easier to give up, to just stay where you are and to reminisce about the good old days and to reminisce about times when things were easier? And if you ever thought like that, then you would know that that's exactly where the people of God were at one point, or at many points really, in their story. Specifically in the book of Isaiah, it's a big book right in the middle of the Bible. That's exactly what God's people were doing. They had settled for what God did in the past because it was too hard and too frightening to believe for what God could do in the future, even that day. And so they settled for less. And so in this passage that we're going to read, starting in Isaiah chapter 43, we're going to read from verses 18 to 20. And just for your information, we're going to stay in this book called Isaiah for the entire month in the hopes that as we kind of go through this series, you'll get a better understanding of what God is trying to say to us in this book. And in this book, really, if I can capture it, this passage, this message in one statement, it would be this: that there is a new beginning, even if you've lost everything. And so here's what it says, starting in verse 18. But forget all that. This is God speaking. It is nothing compared to what I am going to do. Now, forget what? Well, this passage references the supernatural miracles that God displayed in saving his people from Egyptian slavery. It's the miracles of parting the Red Sea and incredible provision in the desert. But as incredible as it was, that was then. And so when God said forget about it, what he was saying was stop living off of yesterday's victories, because every day brings new mercies. Forget about it. Why? For I'm about to do something new. See, I've already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. The wild animals in the fields will thank me, the jackals and owls too, for giving them water in the desert. Meaning, I am going to do something so incredible. Even these low IQ animals will say thank you to me. And then verse 20 goes on to say, yes, I will make rivers in dry wastelands, so my chosen people can be refreshed. Now in this text, it's interesting to note that the promise came before the provision. And so they needed faith and hope to believe that the promise would be delivered. Because we all know it's easy to say new beginnings are possible. Anyone can say that. But do you believe it? Do you believe that a new beginning, new hope is possible for you and your life and your career and your family and your marriage and your children? And whether you believe it or not actually impacts your life in every single area. I mean, I have seen how people behave in relationships where there is hope and where there isn't hope. I have seen how fathers treat their children when there is hope in their hearts and when there isn't hope in their hearts, because that hope that it can get better means so much. In fact, I don't know if you've noticed or not on YouTube or on Facebook, but the Ontario provincial government just released ads about help for those who are struggling with mental health realities during the season. And if that's you need to get help. In fact, if you do get help, that makes you more courageous than the average person, because it takes courage to admit there's a problem and even more courage to do something about it. But the reality is, people are losing hope. They're losing faith that things can get better. And even though their bodies are fine, their minds are drowning in despair because they're not sure there's hope. And it's not their fault. And maybe you look at your circumstance and you're not sure that a new beginning is possible. It's not your fault. The truth is, it's hard to see a new beginning. There's a couple of quotes I think of. One is by Henry Ford, and he said, "Failure is only the opportunity to more intelligently begin again." Sounds so intelligent, doesn't it? Albert Einstein, I think he's a smart guy. He said something similar. He said, "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And honestly, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of more quotes just like that. But there is something that many, if not all of them, have in common. They were all said after the fact. Because the truth is, when you're in it, it's hard to see past it. So when God said in verse 19, "For I'm about to do something new, see, I've already begun. Do you not see it?" If you've read this text before or studied it in any capacity, you would know they didn't see it because they were in it and they couldn't see past it. And honestly, are you and I all that different? When you look at your life, do you see obstacles or do you see opportunities? When you look at your career, especially now in light of COVID-19, when you look at your family, when you look at your marriage, when you look at your kids, when you look at your friends, when you look at your education, do you see obstacles or do you see opportunities? And let me complexify it a bit further. What if the opportunity was in the obstacle? Do you think you'd be able to see it? Because interestingly, in this text, God put the opportunity in the strangest place. Verse 20 says, "I will," or God will make rivers not beside dry wastelands. It doesn't say that he'll make rivers in lieu of dry wastelands. It doesn't say he will replace dry wastelands with rivers. It says, "I will make rivers in dry wastelands so my chosen people can be refreshed." Imagine this. If I were to take a gold bar straight out of Fort Knox and put it on top of a pile of black coal, do you think you would be able to see the gold bar? Probably. But if you couldn't see it, would you be willing to admit that the problem isn't the gold, it's your gaze? In the middle of a wasteland of death, there was a river of life. Would mentally and emotionally and spiritually healthy people be able to see it? Well, you'd think so, but they couldn't. And it cost them. And it's really not all that surprising, because if you focus on the wastelands that drain you, you will never experience the rivers that can refresh you. There are some people, maybe you know them, maybe you're related to them, maybe you are one of them, and you need to be honest about that, but there are some people who see wastelands everywhere they look. And look, pretending like a wasteland doesn't exist is a waste of time. It's actually disastrous to pretend as if a problem doesn't exist, because you will just empower that wasteland to destroy you in every part of your life. You have to be honest about it. But when you continuously and constantly focus on the desert, you'll never experience the deliverance. And so when God says, "Do you not see it?" He's trying to hint to you that there's something else that he sees. In fact, it reminds me of that Christmas song, Little Drummer Boy, and that one line in the song where it says, "Do you see what I see?" But do you? Do we? I've pastored parents who have given up on their children ever believing in God. And I never worded it like this because I wasn't, sermonizing in the middle of a counseling session. But I would ask them in some capacity, look, I get that this is real, but do you see what God sees? You see a problem, but God sees a prodigal waiting to come home. Maybe you look at your life and you look at that circumstance and all you see is a need, and that need is real, but God doesn't just see the need, he sees the provision that's on the way. Maybe you look at your life and you see a wasteland, and that wasteland might be real, but when God sees your life, he sees a river about to burst forth, a river of incredible things. Just because you can't see through it doesn't mean God isn't preparing a way for you to walk through it. It's hard to see. And what's strange about this text, though, is that there's a lot of reasons why it's hard to see opportunity. There's a lot of reasons why it's hard to see what God is doing in your midst, in your family, in your life, around you, and in you. And one of those reasons, it's kind of strange, because for Israel, it was their old beginning that made it hard to see their new beginning. And I'll explain that in a second, but it reminds me of a quote by a leadership type person, author named Andy Grove, and he's written a lot of books, and there's a lot of quotes that he's made, but there is one quote that he's famous for that you've probably heard of. And he said this: success breeds complacency, and complacency breeds failure. Only the paranoid survive. And what he meant was that the world is changing, and in order to really thrive and survive and thrive, you need to adapt, you need to change, you need to grow. Meaning, don't give into the trap of getting comfortable with yesterday's victories, because the success of the past can blind you to the opportunities of the future. And there's a lot of examples, by the way. For example, Blockbuster versus Netflix. If you don't know what Blockbuster is, let us know in the chat, and that way you can make the rest of us feel really, really old. Blockbuster should have been what Netflix became, but they decided not to. Another example is retail stores versus Amazon. And look, I think to some degree we'll always have retail stores, but Amazon has put a lot of retail stores out of business. Print media versus online media. And people have wondered, well, how did this happen? How did these companies and these organizations miss it? And honestly, it's so simple. Prior success caused leaders to choose comfortable living over courageous decision making. If you're not a courageous decision maker, you're probably not a leader. What you are is a manager, which we need those, but it's disastrous to have leaders in management positions and managers in leadership positions. And so if that's a business you're a part of, I don't know how you'd have that conversation, but it'd be worthwhile having it at some point. But prior success caused leaders to choose comfortable living over courageous decision making. Their comfort robbed them of the courage and passion for the future. And it doesn't just happen in organizations, like it happens in relationships too. For example, in my career, I'm a pastor. This is what I do for a living, but there's no punch clock. Like I don't come in at a certain time or leave at a certain time. I work. And truth is, I love what I do. And so I work a lot, but the more time you put in, the less time that you have with your family. And maybe you have a career like mine where there is no punch clock. And so really you can just keep working till you drop. And I had to learn the hard way. Well, correction. My wife made me learn the hard way that the relational investment you make in the past doesn't last. You can't live off of yesterday's investment or yesterday's victories. Today requires fresh and courageous investments of my time and my talent and my treasure. In fact, if you're not careful, the blessing of the past can actually become a barrier to the future. So when God said in verse 16, I am the Lord who opened a way through the waters, making a dry path through the sea, just a few verses earlier than what we read in verse 16, that's what he wanted them to forget. Not forget his faithfulness, not forget his power, not necessarily forget that specific miracle. But the problem was that every time God saved them supernaturally, like in that miracle of the parting of the Red Sea and making a way through the waters, they got comfortable. So comfortable that it prevented them from moving forward. And some of them, and we'll talk about this next week, some of them even wanted to go backwards, back to slavery in Egypt. Why? Because it was more comfortable. And it made me wonder at least about my life. And you'll have to answer this on your own terms for your own life. But it made me wonder for my life, have I become too comfortable to risk big for God? Because in this text, it wasn't so much the persecution that was the barrier to seeing God do incredible things. It was the provision. I mean, honestly, have you ever dreamed of doing or giving something big for the kingdom, but you settled for less? And by the way, if you have, it just means you're normal, because the truth is, and even for me, settling for less is easy. And even though this sounds like an oxymoron, courage is frightening. But what if you did pick courage? what would your family look like? What would your relationship look like? What would your school experience look like? What would your future look like? What would your marriage look like? What if we picked courage? What would happen if a church did not let the success of the past or the comfort of the present blind them to the blessings of the future? When I when I applied, which was kind of an interesting process, but and even though it sounds like I applied and I'm just kind of choosing to work here, the truth is, we really felt the Spirit of God call us here. We know beyond the shadow of any doubt this is not just a job. The Lord wants us here, and we believe that you recognize that as well. But in that initial process, you try to investigate. You try to figure out, well, who is this church? What's this town like? And I had a lot of conversations, even with your former lead pastor, whom I've got nothing but love and respect for, and can't wait to work with him as our regional director. But I was asking, and I was thinking to myself, wow, like it can't be all good, can it? Like there's got to be something. There's just, everyone told me of the incredible potential of the people and the families and their hearts and the new facility. And, there was something I thought of immediately. And most pastors know this to be true. Most of them will never say it because it sounds kind of strange, but I technically haven't met you yet. And so I can say it and I can just kind of feign ignorance if it's something I shouldn't have said, but I'm going to say it anyway, whether it gets me in trouble or not. But here's what it is. Every church has potential, but not every church has courage. The courage to do more than what others do. The courage to give more than what others give. The courage to believe that as good or as bad as it has been, because of who God is and what He's done, the best days are yet to come. And so it's worth my time. It's worth my talent. It's worth my treasure. It's worth everything that I am to give all that I am for His kingdom. But maybe, the quintessential question is, how do you find strength and courage for a new beginning? Well, that's actually surprisingly simple. You just ask. We read till about verse 20 about the wonderful things that God had done and is doing and was able to do. But there was something that they needed to do, but they didn't do. And you can read about that in verse 22, just a few verses later. And this is exactly what it says. This is God speaking. But you always got to pause when God starts a sentence with a but. But, dear family of Jacob, Jacob's name was changed to Israel later on, but dear family of Jacob, you refuse to ask for my help. But it was more than just help. About 12 years ago, my wife and I bought our very first home. By the way, we have bought a home in the GTA. We're moving in August 12th. We've got a bit of bridge financing, so our official move-in date is August 25th. But we've got 4 children, and we have a lot of things, and we have a lot of stress in our lives, and so we just wanted to create a little bit of space. So we're so excited to be moving in on the 12th, and in a bigger way on the 25th. But I remember that first house we bought, I didn't realize this about me, but I'm a lawn guy. I love taking care of the lawn. I love seeding it. I love fertilizing it. I love watering it. And I love bribing my children into just sitting in front of the window and watching it grow. And they get bored pretty easily, but I just love that kind of stuff. And so I did all that for the first home, and I realized before very long, wow, this grass is getting long. I need to buy a lawnmower. So I bought one, and I tell you, I mowed that lawn with pride. Like I was strutting. Oh, I was so happy I had my lawnmower. And it kept growing, so I think I mowed it 3 or 4 times in the span of a week and a half. But when I went to go mow it again, the lawnmower stopped working, and I thought, give me a break. I just bought this thing. What's wrong with it? And like I'm not as handy as I was then as I am today. And so I really had no idea what to do. And so I remember my dad taking this little stick doohickey thing out of an engine one time, that little, that oil thing. So I took that out, having no idea what I'm doing. And I remember him wiping the oil off the end, not even knowing why he did it. But I remember doing that, and I took it in and out a few times. And I tried starting it again. It didn't work. And then, of course, I did what some people do. I kind of shook it, and I kicked it, and it worked for like 5 seconds, and then it stopped. Then I said, forget this. So I put it away. And about a couple of days later, I brought it back out again, and I turned it on, and it worked for like 5 seconds and it went. And some of you watching online already know what the problem was. And really, this was me kind of adulting, me realizing, things that normal adults already know. You know what the problem was? There was no gas in the gas tank. And honestly, as silly as that sounds, it happens all the time. And more specifically, as silly as that sounds, isn't that the way some Christians live their lives? They want to live these lives of faith and hope and love. They want to live their lives doing these great and incredible things for God, but there's no power in their life to live a godly life. And so they keep stumbling over and over and over again over the same things because there's no spiritual gas in the spiritual gas tank. In fact, the reason why Israel found themselves in the same predicament over and over and over again, and maybe you know someone like this, was because they refused to ask for help for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons why they refused to ask for help might be one you can resonate with. In fact, it's in that second part of verse 22. It says, "But dear family of Jacob, you refuse to ask for my help. You have grown tired of me, O Israel." Are you tired today? Are you tired of praying for a provision that doesn't seem like it's coming? Are you tired of waiting and believing for a blessing over your family that just doesn't seem to be manifesting? Or maybe, like in the case of Israel, have you made mistakes? Are you in the middle of a mistake right now? Are you in the middle of what the Bible would call a sin? What we would call today a habitual sin, sins that we just keep doing. We know are self-destructive. We know steal and kill and destroy the passion in our lives to do something meaningful, that drain us of all of our hope and joy. Have you made a mistake or are in the middle of a mistake? And is it causing you to be tired in your faith? And if you are tired, I don't know what made you tired, but it makes me wonder, is it possible for people who have become weary on the journey, whatever those reasons might be, to experience renewed energy? Does God still give the courage to believe there's hope and the strength to hold on? Can there be a new beginning even if you've lost everything? Of course, because we serve a God who can do anything. But what do I do? What do you do? What do we do? And I thought of a statement that I'd like to leave you with. In fact, if you fell asleep during the message and you're just waking up now, I've got good news for you. If you do this one statement, you will be fine. In fact, even as a church, even if half of what we do, we get wrong, if we just do this statement, we will be fine. And the statement is this: invite and invest, and let God handle the rest. And by invite, I mean invite God to come in and help, because new beginnings are rarely easy. Maybe for you, it's a new beginning because of a tragedy or a mistake or a circumstance that you can't control. Even in that place, in that circumstance, there is mercy, there is grace, there is hope. In fact, this passage, Isaiah 43, it foreshadows the greatest new beginning you can ever experience, and that's the forgiveness that Jesus Christ offers because of his death and resurrection. When he comes into your life, when you receive him, he gives you new hope and new life and new love and new energy. But that invitation for him to come in is more than just a one-time decision. It's a lifestyle of prayer that keeps inviting the God who can do anything into our lives. But don't just invite and invest, because new beginnings are rarely cheap. In fact, you can turn a new beginning into the same old disaster by not investing what you should have invested. For example, if you want to have a great relationship with your kids, but you don't make that investment, as bad as that relationship is today, I can guarantee you it'll be worse in 5 to 10 years. You can take that opportunity of a new beginning and you can turn it into the same old disaster if you don't make the appropriate investment. And the same is even true for a church. I am convinced, I believe beyond the shadow of any doubt. In fact, I think some of you believed this long before I got here. In fact, I'm convinced some of you believed this long before I was born, that the best days of Heartland are not behind her, they're ahead of her. But the truth is, it will take more of your time and my time, more of our talent and more of our treasure. But honestly, why not? I mean, you got to live for something anyway. Why not live for something that can make a tangible difference in the GTA? So invite and invest and let God handle the rest. Lest we forget, we serve the God who can make rivers in dry wastelands. We serve the God for whom nothing is impossible. There is absolutely nothing that He can't do. And so my prayer for you today, and for this season, and for the many seasons to come, is for faith and hope to rise up and to fill our hearts, because the God who loves us is doing something new in you and all around you. And I'm convinced that even if you've lost everything, there's a new beginning that God has in store. And so as we close with this song, my prayer again is that faith and hope would rise up, that you would truly believe that regardless of what life is or what it is in your life, there can be incredible hope and love and joy and peace. And so just before we go, let's take a moment and worship together.